My name is Wendy Collins. I'm 34. And the moment my relationship ended didn't sound like heartbreak. It sounded like something clicking into place, like a detail finally aligning after weeks of not quite making sense. I work as a procurement analyst for a hospital network in Charlotte. My days are structured: contracts, vendors, numbers that either add up or they don't. I like things that make sense. I like systems that behave the way they're supposed to. People are harder. Brandon Hale is 31, event marketing. Fast-paced, image-driven, always surrounded by people who seemed just slightly louder than necessary. When we met, that difference felt balanced. He brought energy, I brought stability. At least, that's what I told myself. We had been together just under 4 years, living together for a little over one, talking about the future in a way that sounded real enough that I stopped questioning it. We were already paying deposits for things, nothing extravagant, just enough to make everything feel official. A venue, a photographer, small, expensive decisions that quietly anchor you to a timeline. I was covering more than half of it, not because we agreed to it in any formal way, just because it kept happening. Brandon always had a reason. A client dinner he had to front, a last-minute outfit for an event, a weekend trip that was somehow good for networking. It was always temporary, always justified. And I let it be, because I believed we were building something shared. But looking back now, there was a pattern I ignored longer than I should have. Anything that benefited Brandon directly was urgent. Anything that required mutual responsibility was negotiable. Rent discussions took effort. Grocery splits became conversations. Wedding payments were delayed, revisited, adjusted. But if Brandon wanted something, new luggage, upgraded skincare, a weekend away, it wasn't a discussion. It was an expectation. And slowly, without saying it out loud, I adjusted to that. About 2 months before everything ended, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to and say there. It was quieter. Brandon became careful with his phone. Not subtle about it either. Smiling at the screen, then angling it away. Taking calls on the balcony. Sleeping with it tucked under his pillow like it contained something fragile. The first time I asked, he didn't hesitate. Not everything in my life is your business, Wendy. The speed of that response stayed with me longer than the words themselves, because it wasn't defensive. It was prepared. After that, I stopped asking. But I started noticing. He went out more, explained less, became just slightly harder to reach in ways that didn't quite have a reason. Then came the Miami trip. He talked about it constantly. Flights, beach clubs, matching outfits with his friends. Hotel upgrades that sounded expensive. More expensive than the wedding payments he kept postponing. I didn't say much at first. There's a point where asking questions stops giving you answers and just creates arguments. But then one morning, everything shifted. I was in the kitchen making coffee before work. Brandon had left his phone on the counter when he went to shower. I wasn't looking at it. The screen lit up on its own, and the message preview was just there. Last night was worth the risk. There was a name attached to it I didn't recognize. I stared at it longer than I should have. Long enough for the wording to settle in. Long enough for my brain to stop trying to explain it away. Because there are messages that feel neutral, and there are messages that don't. I didn't touch the phone. Didn't unlock it. I just stood there, replaying the last 2 months in my head. The secrecy, the distance, the way simple questions suddenly felt like accusations. When Brandon walked back into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel, scrolling through his phone like nothing existed outside of it, I watched his face. That's when it became real. Because when he saw the message, he froze. Not confused. Not curious. Just alert. He glanced at me, locked the screen, turned the phone face down. Like instinct. Like practice. I asked who had texted him. He answered too quickly. A coworker. Event schedule stuff. The explanation came before the question. That's always a sign. I nodded. Didn't push. Because there's no point arguing with someone who's already decided you're wrong. But the message stayed with me all day. And that night, the last piece fell into place. Around 10 p.m., I was sitting on the couch when one of Brandon's friends posted an Instagram story. I wasn't looking for anything. It just appeared. A crowded house party, loud music, too many people in a space that wasn't built for it. And then I saw him, standing near the kitchen, laughing, relaxed. There was a woman next to him. Her arm wasn't just brushing against him. It was resting around his waist like it belonged there. And Brandon leaned into it. Not casually, comfortably. The kind of comfort that doesn't happen in a moment. He said something into her ear. She smiled. And for a second, I realized something that felt strangely calm. I hadn't seen that expression directed at me in a while. The video ended after 10 seconds. I watched it twice, not because I needed confirmation, but because part of me still wanted to be wrong. Eventually, that part went quiet. Because there's a moment where your mind stops negotiating with reality and just accepts it. I didn't call him, didn't text. I just sat there, waiting. And for the first time in weeks, everything made sense. Brandon came home a little after 1 a.m. He opened the door quietly, like he was trying not to wake me. The problem was, I wasn't asleep. I was still sitting on the couch, lights on, TV muted, waiting in a way that didn't feel emotional anymore, just deliberate. The second he saw me, he paused. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But I did, because I had spent the entire day noticing things. "Why are you still up?" he asked, like that was the part of the situation that needed explaining. His voice was casual, slightly annoyed, like I had disrupted something routine. I looked at him for a second before answering. "I saw the video." That was it. No build-up, no accusation, just the truth placed between us. He froze. Not dramatically, just enough. Just long enough for me to see the calculations start. "What video?" he asked, already defensive. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice. "Your friend's Instagram story, the party." His expression tightened, then immediately shifted into something familiar. Dismissal. He rolled his eyes and dropped his keys on the counter a little harder than necessary. "You're stalking my friends now?" That was his first move. Not confusion, not explanation. Deflection. I shook my head slightly. "It showed up on my feed. I recognized you." Then I added, calmly, "And the woman with her arm around your waist." That was when the tone changed. He exhaled sharply, like I was exhausting him. "It was a crowded party, Wendy. People stand close. That doesn't mean anything." I watched him as he said it. The ease, the rehearsed rhythm, and something inside me didn't react, because I already knew. So instead of arguing, I just kept going. "I saw a message this morning," I said. That got his attention. His eyes flicked toward me, sharper this time. "What message?" "The one that said a last night was worth the risk." Silence. Not long, but long enough. I continued before he could interrupt. "You left your phone on the counter. The screen lit up. I didn't touch it. I didn't go through anything." I paused. "But I saw your face when you read it." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And for a moment, I saw it. Not guilt. Not exactly. Just pressure. Like he was deciding which version of the truth would cost him less. "You're making assumptions," he said finally. "You don't know what that message was about." I nodded. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't know what it was about." Then I met his eyes. "But I know what it looked like." He scoffed. "That's the problem, Wendy. You always jump to conclusions instead of just trusting me." That word, trust. He said it like it belonged to him, like he hadn't been quietly dismantling it for weeks. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just laid everything out. The phone, the secrecy, the way you've been acting for the last 2 months, the message, the video. I gestured slightly toward him. "The way you're reacting right now." He tried to interrupt. "Because you're accusing me of—" I didn't stop him loudly. I just kept speaking. And somehow that was enough to cut through him. "I'm not interested in debating details," I said. "I'm looking at the pattern." That landed. Because patterns are harder to argue with. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then I took a breath and said the part that had already settled in my mind hours ago. "I'm not going to marry someone who behaves like this." The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt accurate. Brandon blinked at me, like he was waiting for something else. For the argument to continue, for me to get emotional, for this to turn into something he could manage. But it didn't. "Start packing your things," I added. That's when he laughed. Not nervously, not uncertainly, dismissively. Like I had just said something ridiculous. "You're not serious." I didn't respond, because I was. And he could tell. It took a few seconds, but I watched the realization settle in, slowly, uncomfortably. "You're ending this?" he asked. "Over a misunderstanding?" "It stopped being a misunderstanding when you started lying," I said. That changed his expression immediately. He crossed his arms, posture tightening. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" "Yes," he snapped. "Nothing happened. She's just someone I met. We were talking. That's it." I tilted my head slightly. "Then why did it feel like something worth hiding?" He hesitated, just for a second, then pushed forward. "Even if something did happen," he said, frustration bleeding into his voice, "that doesn't mean you get to throw me out of the apartment." There it was. Not denial. Not apology. Just negotiation. Like loyalty was optional. But my reaction was the real issue. I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said very clearly, "This apartment is in my name. I gestured around us. The lease, the rent, the utilities. I met his eyes again. You moved in because we were planning a future together. A small pause. That plan just changed. Something in his face shifted then, because he realized I wasn't going to argue in circles. I wasn't going to chase explanations. I had already moved past that. He tried a different angle. Couples work through things like this all the time. I didn't respond. You're sabotaging everything, he continued, because you can't handle a little uncertainty. I let him talk for about 30 seconds. Then I cut in, calm and steady. It's over. That was it. No escalation. No emotion. Just final. And that's when he finally understood. Really understood. Because the confidence drained out of him almost instantly. First came guilt. Wendy, come on. 4 years? Then pressure. What about the wedding? The deposits? Our families? Then reputation. People are going to think you overreacted. I nodded slightly. That's fine. That answer didn't help him. He paced the living room, running a hand through his hair, trying to find something that would land. Eventually, he stopped, tried to reset. Maybe we should just sleep on this, he said. Talk tomorrow, like adults. There's nothing to sleep on. My voice didn't change. The decision is already made. That's when the anger showed up. So you're just kicking me out right now? It's barely past 1, I said. And you just came back from a party with someone you've been hiding. I held his gaze. Yes, you need to pack. He muttered something under his breath and walked into the bedroom. I followed a minute later, not to argue, just to make sure this stayed what it was. An ending. He started throwing clothes into a suitcase. Not folding, not organizing, just shoving. Each movement sharper than the last. And while he packed, he kept talking. Complaining. About how unfair I was being. About how I was overreacting. About how none of this justified what I was doing. I let him talk, because none of it changed anything. Then, in the middle of all that, he said something that made me pause. What about Miami? I thought I misheard him. What? My trip, he said like it was obvious. Next month. I stared at him, waiting. Because surely that wasn't what he meant. We were already planning it, he continued. Flights, hotel, everything's booked. I didn't say anything, so he kept going. And you were helping cover part of it, he added, since it's basically a pre-wedding thing. There was a moment, a very specific kind of silence. The kind where your brain stops trying to interpret and just observes. We just ended our relationship, I said slowly. He sighed. Like I was the difficult one. That doesn't change the fact that the trip is already planned. I watched him. Really watched him. Trying to understand how someone could say that and mean it. And refusing to pay now, he added, is honestly kind of controlling. That word again. Controlling. Placed carefully. Like it was supposed to shift something. But it didn't. Because in that moment, everything about him made sense in a way it never had before. So I explained it. Clearly. Simply. There is no wedding anymore. I held his gaze. So there's no pre-wedding trip. A beat. And I'm not funding a vacation for someone who just betrayed me. His expression hardened immediately. That's petty. No, I said quietly. It's accurate. He shook his head, frustrated. The trip has nothing to do with what happened tonight. It had everything to do with the wedding, I replied. That ended 15 minutes ago. That didn't land. Or maybe it did. And he just didn't like it. Instead, he pivoted. It's going to be embarrassing if I cancel, he said. Everyone already knows about it. I didn't respond, so he kept going. My friends are expecting me there. Still nothing. Then he said the part that explained everything. I've been telling Sam about it for weeks, he added. How I can still do what I want, even while being in a relationship. A small pause. Because you handle most of the financial stuff anyway. There it was. Not hidden. Not softened. Just stated. And for a second I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not even hurt. Just clarity. A clean, quiet understanding of what this had actually been. I nodded once. If you want to go celebrate your freedom in Miami, I said, you're welcome to. Then I picked up his suitcase and set it by the door. You're just not doing it with my money. He stared at me, furious, but with nothing left to argue. Because for the first time, there wasn't anything unclear about where I stood. He grabbed his suitcase, muttered something about how his friends would understand, and walked out. The door closed behind him, and the apartment went quiet. Not empty, not lonely, just still. And for the first time in weeks, everything made sense. I didn't hear from Brandon for 2 days. No messages, no missed calls, no last-minute attempts to rewrite what had already happened. And honestly, I preferred it that way. The apartment felt different without him. Not empty, just quieter in a way that didn't require effort. I spent the weekend doing things that made sense. Practical things. I changed passwords on shared accounts, canceled the catering deposit, sent a short, neutral email to the venue explaining that the wedding wasn't happening anymore. No explanations, no emotional details. Just logistics. It felt strangely familiar, like work. A situation had changed, so I adjusted the system around it. By Sunday afternoon, I had almost settled into that rhythm. Then my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made me pause. Kayla, one of Brandon's friends. We weren't close, but we'd been around each other enough. Birthdays, group dinners, the kind of social overlap that builds quiet familiarity without real connection. Her message was short. Hey, is Brandon being serious about what he told us? I stared at it for a second. Something about the wording felt off. I replied. What did he say? There was a brief pause. Then 3 dots. Then a screenshot. It was from a group chat. Brandon's group chat. And judging by the names at the top, most of the people in that thread were the same ones he had been planning that Miami trip with. The message was long. A rant. But the tone was familiar. Confident. Defensive. Slightly performative. According to Brandon's version of events, I had thrown him out over nothing. He said I got insecure because he went to a party. That I couldn't handle him having a life outside the relationship. That I was now refusing to pay for the Miami trip just to punish him. I read it once. Then again, not because it was confusing, but because it was precise, carefully framed. Every detail angled just enough to make him look reasonable. And me, unstable. At the bottom of the screenshot, there was another message. Shorter, more casual. I've been telling you guys for weeks. I still do whatever I want. It's not like she was going to stop funding things now. I stopped there, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I had already felt without proof. This was how he talked about me when I wasn't there. Not as a partner, not as someone he respected. Just a resource. Kayla sent another message. He showed up here Friday night with his suitcase. I didn't respond right away, so she continued. He was really upset, like angry and embarrassed at the same time. A small pause. But not everyone is seeing it the way he expected. That got my attention. What do you mean? I asked. There was a longer pause this time. Then her reply came through. At first, people were on his side, she said, because of how he told it. That made sense. He was good at that. Framing things. Controlling the narrative just enough to avoid being questioned. But then someone asked what actually happened, she added. I leaned back slightly against the couch. Reading slower now. He tried to keep it vague. Said you overreacted. Said you were controlling. Another message. But then someone asked about the girl. There it was. The part he couldn't smooth over. Kayla continued. He said she was just someone he met at the party. Nothing serious. I could almost hear his tone. Casual, dismissive, minimizing. But, she added, a couple of people in the room had already seen him with her before. That didn't surprise me. Patterns rarely exist in isolation. And once that came up, she wrote, things started getting uncomfortable. I could picture it. The shift. Subtle at first, then harder to ignore. People started asking more direct questions, Kayla said. Like why he was talking to someone like that while he was still in a relationship. I exhaled slowly, not out of relief, just recognition. And then he brought up the Miami trip again. Of course he did. He kept saying you had already agreed to help pay for it, she continued. That backing out now was controlling. I closed my eyes briefly, just for a second, because even now, the logic was consistent, in his mind. But that didn't really land, Kayla added. There was a pause before her next message, like she was choosing how to phrase it. One of the girls asked something pretty simple. Another pause. If the relationship is over, why would she still be paying for anything? I opened my eyes again, staring at the screen, waiting. He didn't really have an answer, Kayla wrote. Of course he didn't. Because the answer wasn't logical. It was entitlement. And that's when everything started falling apart, she added. Her messages came a little faster now, like she was replaying it as she typed. He got defensive, then frustrated, then emotional. I could picture that too, the way he escalated when something stopped going his way. He kept repeating the same things, she said, that you were overreacting, that you were ruining everything. A small pause. But no one was really agreeing anymore. That part landed differently. Not because I needed validation, but because it confirmed something else. The version of reality he had been building only worked when no one questioned it. And then someone asked about the message, she added. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. Oh, what message? I typed. The one he sent her, Kayla replied. Another screenshot came through. Not from the group chat this time. From a private conversation someone had shown the room. It was short. Just one line. Last night was worth the risk. Same wording, different context. And suddenly, there was no ambiguity left. He said it didn't mean anything, Kayla wrote. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. But at that point, she continued, no one really believed that anymore. I leaned back into the couch again, phone still in my hand, everything quiet around me. The mood changed after that, she said. People stopped comforting him. Another pause. They started questioning him. That was the shift. The one he didn't anticipate. The one he couldn't control. He got louder, she added, more defensive. I could hear it, see it, the unraveling. And then he started talking about the trip again. Of course, because that was the part he cared about. He said it was unfair, Kayla wrote, that you cut him off right before it. I shook my head slightly, not in disbelief. Just acknowledgement. And someone asked him something that kind of ended the conversation. I waited, reading slower now. What? Kayla's reply came a few seconds later. If you wanted that much freedom, a pause. Why were you expecting her to fund it? I stared at that line, longer than I expected, because it wasn't complicated. It wasn't emotional. It was just clear. And apparently, in that room, clarity had finally shown up. Kayla didn't send anything for a minute after that. Just silence. Like even she wasn't sure how to summarize what came next. When her message finally came through, it was shorter. He didn't take that well. I didn't need details to understand what that meant. But she gave them anyway. He tried to argue, she wrote. Said it wasn't about money. That it was about fairness. I let out a quiet breath. Because that word again, fairness, only ever showed up when things stopped going his way. But no one really engaged with that, she continued. Another pause. Someone pointed out that fairness doesn't mean someone keeps giving after you've already taken more than you should have. That line stayed with me, not because it was new, but because it was finally being said out loud by someone else. Kayla's messages came slower after that, like she was choosing what mattered. He started getting emotional, she said. Not sad at first, just frustrated. I could picture it. The pacing, the raised voice, the way he would try to pull attention back toward himself. He kept saying you embarrassed him, she added, that you could have handled it privately. I tilted my head slightly, because that part almost sounded reasonable. Until you looked at it properly. Private would have meant continuing the same pattern. Quietly. Conveniently. For him. But then someone reminded him, she wrote, that he was the one who brought it into the room. Another pause. By showing up with a suitcase and a story. That was the moment. The one where the narrative stops being something you control and becomes something other people evaluate. And after that, Kayla continued, he just kind of lost it. I didn't interrupt. Didn't respond. I just read. He started raising his voice, saying it wasn't that serious, that you were overreacting, that you ruined everything over something small. I closed my eyes briefly, because I had heard those exact words, just framed differently. And then someone asked him what exactly was small about it, she added. That question didn't need an answer. And he didn't really have one. Of course he didn't. Because once you remove the framing, all that's left is the truth. He started pacing, she wrote, talking faster, repeating himself. I could see it clearly now. The unraveling. Not dramatic, just inevitable. And then the Miami trip came up again. That part almost felt predictable now, like a loop he couldn't break out of. He said it was going to be embarrassing to cancel, Kayla wrote, that everyone already knew about it, that he'd been talking about it for weeks. I remembered that, the way he described it, the excitement, the entitlement hidden just beneath it. And someone asked if that was the real problem, she added. A pause. Or if the real problem was that he couldn't afford it anymore. That landed harder than anything else. Because it wasn't emotional, it was factual. And that's when he actually broke, she said. I stared at the screen, waiting. He started yelling, Kayla continued. Then he got quiet. Then he started crying. Not quiet tears. Not controlled. Just collapse. He kept saying it wasn't fair, she added again. That everything got taken away all at once. I let that sit for a moment. Because from his perspective, maybe it did feel that way. The relationship, the stability, the financial support, all gone at once. But that wasn't what actually happened. What happened was that everything he had been relying on finally stopped being available. He said you ruined his plans, she wrote. I shook my head slightly, not in disagreement, just correction, because I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped participating. And by the end of the night, Kayla added, no one really knew what to say to him anymore. That part felt accurate, because there's a point where explanation runs out, and all that's left is consequence. He ended up just sitting there, she said, not talking. Another pause. And the trip kind of stopped being a topic. Of course it did. Because without the structure supporting it, it didn't exist anymore. Kayla's final message came a minute later. He spent weeks talking about how independent he was. A small pause. I think this was the first time he actually had to be. I stared at that line. Longer than anything else. Because it didn't feel like commentary. It felt like conclusion. I typed back a simple response. Thanks for telling me. She replied with a short, of course. And that was it. No follow-up. No extra questions. Just done. I set my phone down on the table. The apartment was quiet again. But this time it felt different. Not just still. Resolved. I looked around the space. Same furniture. Same walls. Same life. Technically. But something fundamental had shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just cleanly. Because the confusion was gone. The second guessing. The constant effort to make something make sense when it didn't. All of it. Gone. And in its place, there was something simpler. Someone who cheats on you, while expecting you to keep funding their life, isn't confused. They're not misunderstood. They're not complicated. They're just clear. And once you see that clearly, there's nothing left to debate. Walking away didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a correction. A precise one. The kind I deal with every day at work. Something doesn't add up. So you fix it. You don't argue with the numbers. You adjust the system. And move on. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle around me. Not heavy, not empty. Just steady. And for the first time in a long time, everything balanced again.